The waiting room outside Operating Room 3 at Charity Grove Medical Center had gone past the point of ordinary tension into something quieter and heavier. The specific silence of a hospital corridor where everyone has already been told the odds, and none of them are good, and inside that room, on the table, an 11-year-old boy named Toby Marsh lay under lights that had been burning for 6 hours. Straight while a team of surgeons worked to stop internal bleeding that would not, no matter what they tried, agree to stop. He had been hit by a delivery truck 4 blocks from his school 40 minutes after the final bell. A driver who had run a yellow light that turned red half a second too soon, and by the time the ambulance reached Charity Grove. Toby had already lost enough blood that the trauma attending, a 22-year veteran named Dr. Rachel Okafor, had used the word critical in a tone she reserved for the handful of cases each year that kept her awake afterward. His mother, Denise Marsh, sat in the family waiting area with her hands pressed so tightly together the knuckles had gone white. And beside her, holding her hand without being asked, sat a 9-year-old girl named Ivy Calloway, who could not see the clock on the wall, or the doors to the operating room, or her own mother's face beside her. Because Ivy Calloway had been blind since birth, the result of a rare condition called Leber's congenital amaurosis that had taken her sight before she had ever fully had it to lose. Ivy and Toby were neighbors, had been since Ivy's family moved in 3 years earlier, and in that time Toby had become the kind of friend who never once treated her blindness as the most interesting thing about her, walking her to the bus stop, describing the color of the sky in words she had taught him to use for her. Patient. Unhurried words that had nothing to do with wavelengths of light and everything to do with warmth and temperature and sound. When Denise had called Ivy's mother in a state of near collapse to ask if someone could sit with her at the hospital because there was no one else, Ivy had insisted on coming too, had insisted so forcefully, in fact, that her mother, bewildered but unwilling to fight her in the middle of a crisis, had simply brought her along. Ivy had been quiet for the first 4 hours, sitting very still, her head tilted in the particular way blind children learn to tilt it, listening to a hospital the way sighted people watch one, and then, in the 5th hour, she had stood up abruptly and said, "Something's wrong." It changed. Her mother said, "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Ivy said the sound. "From the room. It's different now. I need to talk to the doctor." Denise, exhausted and raw, said, "Ivy." "Honey, the doctors are working as hard as they can," Ivy said. With an unusual firmness for a 9-year-old, "I know how to save him." "Please, I need someone to listen to me." A nurse named Foster, who had been passing through the family area and had stopped initially, only because a child's raised voice in a trauma waiting room tends to draw attention, crouched down to Ivy's level and said gently, "What is it you're hearing, sweetheart?" Ivy said, "I've been listening to the machine since we got here. The beeping one, the heart one. It's been steady for hours. The same rhythm over and over. I know exactly what it sounds like now. But about 10 minutes ago it changed. It's not skipping exactly. It's like it's searching for something. Like it can't find its rhythm anymore." Nurse Foster's expression shifted. The particular shift of a medical professional recalibrating how seriously to take a claim that sounds, on its face, implausible. She said, "You can hear his heart monitor from out here?" Ivy said, "I can hear everything out here." That's the thing about not seeing. Nobody ever taught me not to listen. What Nurse Foster did not know, and what Ivy had never had reason to explain to anyone outside her own small circle of specialists, was that congenital blindness frequently produces measurable, well-documented compensations in auditory processing, the brain reallocating the cortical territory that would have processed vision toward sharpening sound instead, and Ivy Calloway. Evaluated 3 years earlier by an audiologist at a children's hospital in the city, had tested in the top 1st percentile for pitch discrimination and rhythmic pattern recognition of any child the specialist had assessed in a 20-year career. Ivy did not think of this as a superpower. She thought of it as simply the way she had always heard the world. The same way a sighted child does not think of eyesight as remarkable. Nurse Foster, to her enormous credit, did not dismiss a blind 9-year-old's claim as a grieving family's desperate imagination. She had worked trauma long enough to know that certainty sometimes arrives from unexpected places, and she said, "Wait here 1 second," and went through the double doors into the operating suite. And 30 seconds later, Dr. Okafor herself came out, still in her surgical gown, mask pulled down, her face carrying the particular controlled exhaustion of a surgeon 6 hours into a case that was not going the way she needed it to. She crouched in front of Ivy the way Nurse Foster had. She said, "I hear you noticed something about the monitor." Ivy said, "The rhythm's wrong. It's not fast or slow exactly. It's uneven in a pattern I haven't heard before. Like 3 good beats. And then a stumble. Then 3 more. Then a stumble again. It's been doing that since about 10 minutes ago." "Doctor," Okafor went very still. Inside the operating room, the surgical team had spent the last 20 minutes chasing a bleed they could not fully localize. Toby's blood pressure sliding despite every intervention, and the monitor Ivy was describing from 40 feet away through a closed door over the ambient noise of a hospital corridor was displaying exactly the arrhythmic pattern Ivy had just described in words no textbook would have chosen but that matched. With unsettling precision, the signature of a specific and easily missed complication. A slow cardiac tamponade, blood pooling in the sac around the heart, squeezing it in a way that produces exactly the kind of intermittent, stumbling rhythm Ivy had picked out from a hallway. It was not the injury the surgical team had been focused on. They had been chasing abdominal bleeding, reasonably, given the mechanism of injury, and a slow tamponade, quiet, and easy to miss beneath louder. More obvious trauma can kill a patient in the time it takes a team to keep looking in the wrong place. "Doctor," Okafor stood up so fast her knees cracked audibly. She said to Nurse Foster, "Get me an echo in there right now." Tamponade workup, go, and she was through the double doors before she finished the sentence. And 11 minutes later, a bedside echocardiogram confirmed exactly what Ivy Calloway had heard through a closed door with no medical training beyond a lifetime of listening to a world she could not see. Toby Marsh was in cardiac tamponade, a complication that, left unaddressed for even another 15 or 20 minutes while the team continued focusing on the abdominal bleed, would very likely have stopped his heart before anyone identified the actual cause. Dr. Okafor performed a pericardiocentesis at the bedside within minutes, relieving the pressure crushing Toby's heart and Toby's blood pressure, which had been sliding for the better part of an hour despite every abdominal intervention the team could throw at it. Stabilized almost immediately once the real problem was finally being treated. He came out of surgery 2 hours later. He would spend 11 days in the hospital and would carry a scar he'd eventually show off to friends with the casual pride boys that age reserved for scars, but he would live. And the surgical team would later document, in a case review that Dr. Okafor insisted on writing up herself, that the deciding factor in identifying the tamponade in time had been an observation made by a blind 9-year-old in the family waiting area. A detail so unusual that the hospital's chief of surgery asked to meet Ivy personally once Toby was stable enough for visitors. He found her sitting beside Toby's hospital bed 4 days later, her hand resting lightly on his arm so she would know if he moved, describing to him in the patient, unhurried language she always used what she imagined the sunset outside his window looked like based on the warmth she could feel through the glass. The chief of surgery, a formal man not given to sentimentality, crouched down and said, "Young lady, do you have any idea what you did?" Ivy considered this seriously, the way she considered most questions. She said, "I just listened. That's the only thing I know how to do really well." He said, "You may have saved his life." Ivy said, "He saved parts of mine too. He just never had a doctor come out and tell him so." Dr. Okafor, standing in the doorway, did not disagree. Toby Marsh, once he was well enough to fully understand what had happened, could not stop talking about it to anyone who would listen. That his best friend, the one who had never once needed to see him to know him, had heard something wrong in a hospital hallway that 11 doctors and nurses inside the operating room, focused correctly but incompletely on the wrong injury, had not caught in time. Denise Marsh, months later, would say that she had spent that entire night believing she was the one who needed to be strong for her son, and had never once considered that the strength arriving to save him would come from a blind girl who simply refused to stop listening when everyone around her assumed there was nothing more to hear.